You've probably seen Zodiac or Monster, but this list is different. These are true crime films that flew under the radar. You'll find links in the description for all the films on this list, and if I missed one you think belongs here, add it in the comments. The Onion Field is one of the most underrated crime films of the 1970s and a strong neo-noir in its own right. It is based on Joseph Wombor's 1973 non-fiction book about the kidnapping of two plainclothes LAPD officers during a traffic stop and the murder of one of them that followed. Harold Becker directed the film in 1979, with Wombor adapting his own book for the screen, and it also became one of James Woods' major early roles. His work here is chilling, and it gives the whole movie an extra level of tension. It is an uncompromising movie, often brutal in its storytelling, but also very affecting, especially if you do not know much about the real case going in. The Young Poisoner's Handbook is loosely based on the story of Graham Young, the real-life British criminal nicknamed the Teacup Murderer. As the film itself notes, some details were changed, but it still follows the main shape of Young's case. Growing up in 1960s Britain, Graham becomes obsessed with medicine and chemical experiments. At first, his poisonings stay close to home: a school friend, his stepmother, his sister, and his father. After his arrest, he is sent to a hospital for the criminally insane, where psychologist Ernest Ziegler tries to rehabilitate him. But once he is released and given a job in a factory, the chemicals around him become too tempting to resist. The film is uneven, but in an interesting way. It moves from black comedy to a surprisingly earnest story of therapy, and then back into something darker. Hugh O'Connor's performance holds it together. Based on the real-life Lonely Hearts Killers case, The Honeymoon Killers is a grim and unflinching look at two deeply damaged people who became a deadly team. In the late 1940s, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck lured vulnerable women through personal ads, promising love, only to scam them and, in several cases, murder them. The film focuses on Martha, a nurse plagued by insecurity and desperation. When she falls for Raymond, a small-time con artist, her obsession grows dangerous. Even after learning he seduces and robs other women, Martha doesn't leave. She joins in. Driven by jealousy, she helps him plan and carry out brutal crimes across several states. Shot in grainy black and white and written and directed by Leonard Castle, in his only film as director, The Honeymoon Killers feels almost like a newsreel. There's no attempt to soften the horror or glamorize the killers. It's a stark portrayal of how emotional dependency and resentment can spiral into violence. Ed Gein tells the story of one of the most infamous figures in American crime. In 1957, police searched his farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin, and found human remains, including skulls, body parts, and objects made from skin and bone. The movie focuses on Gein's isolated life, his fixation on his dead mother, and his move from grave robbing to murder. Steve Railsback plays Gein without turning him into a horror movie monster. Compared to the better-known films Gein inspired, including Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this one stays much closer to the real case. It is also less graphic than it could have been, which makes the actual details feel even more disturbing. Let Him Have It looks at one of the most controversial criminal cases in British history, the 1952 Craig Bentley murder case, where a single trial helped turn the justice system itself into a national question. Peter Medak's dark, gripping film begins in wartime London in 1941, where a young boy is pulled from the rubble after suffering severe head injuries. Years later, that boy is Derek Bentley, played by Chris Eccleston. He is diagnosed as epileptic and intellectually limited, and eventually becomes involved in a murder case far bigger than he seems able to understand. The trial is bleak and short, with Derek's parents fighting to save him as the case moves beyond the courtroom and reaches Parliament. The film becomes less about one crime and more about a justice system under pressure, where the question is not only who is guilty, but whether the system is capable of admitting doubt before it is too late. Released the same year as Rosemary's Baby and Planet of the Apes, The Boston Strangler didn't get the spotlight it deserved, but it's one of the strongest true crime films of its time. Based on the real-life case, the story follows police investigator John Bottomley, Henry Fonda, as he tracks a killer responsible for the brutal murders of several women in Boston. Tony Curtis gives a career-best performance as Albert DeSalvo, the man eventually arrested for the crimes, but the film never offers easy answers. Did he actually do it, or is something deeper going on? That uncertainty gives the movie an eerie, lingering power. Stylistically, it's daring. Director Richard Fleischer uses split screens, POV shots, visual distortions, and crossfades to show both the investigation and DeSalvo's inner world. The result is a film that feels immersive, psychological, and surprisingly modern for its time. This chilling HBO film is based on the real-life investigation of Soviet serial killer Andrei Chikatilo, responsible for the murder of over 50 people, mostly children and teenagers, between 1978 and 1990. His crimes were brutal. Victims were stabbed repeatedly, often mutilated, and their eyes gouged out. But perhaps even more disturbing than the killings themselves was the system that refused to admit he existed. Set in the 1980s, Citizen X follows forensic specialist Viktor Burakov as he tries to track down the killer. But it's not just Chikatilo he's up against, it's the Soviet bureaucracy. Officials block media coverage, reject FBI support, and deny resources, all to protect the illusion that such crimes couldn't happen in the USSR. Rillington Place is based on a case that is fairly well known in Britain, but if you do not know much about it, the less said about the plot, the better. The film tells the story of British serial killer John Christie, played by Richard Attenborough in one of his most chilling performances. Christie committed many of his crimes in the London terraced house of the title, and the film looks at his crimes, his behaviour, and the people living around him, including Timothy and Beryl Evans. Timothy is played by John Hurt in what became a major breakthrough role for him. The death penalty also hangs over the story, which gives the film an extra layer beyond the usual serial killer drama. It does not turn into a broad social argument, but it remains a grim and convincing character study, as well as a devastating film about how one man's crimes destroyed another man's life. The Black Panther is based on the true story of armed robber and murderer Donald Nielsen, played here by Donald Sumpter. Nielsen terrified parts of the north of England and the Midlands during the 1970s, and his crimes culminated in the kidnapping of teenage heiress Leslie Whittle, which created a media frenzy and shocked the country. Few true crime films feel this committed to authenticity. Like 10 Rillington Place, the film avoids easy sensationalism and lets the facts do most of the work. Screenwriter Michael Armstrong used court records, witness testimony, and verifiable material to reconstruct the events as closely as possible. Ian Merrick carries the same restraint into the direction. The style is stripped down, with simple, effective camera work, and Donald Sumpter gives a realistic and frightening performance as Nielsen. Released only a year after Nielsen's conviction, The Black Panther was attacked by the British press, partly because many felt it came too soon. The controversy quickly buried the film, but that only makes it more interesting now. A mature, careful, true crime drama that was punished for being too close to the case it was examining. Angst is an Austrian psychological thriller loosely based on a real case, and the first and only feature directed by Gerald Cargill. It follows an unnamed killer who has been sent to prison for murdering an elderly woman, then released back into society. Almost immediately, his compulsion returns. After a failed attempt to find a victim, he ends up at a secluded country farmhouse where most of the film takes place. Once inside, he terrorizes the people living there, using them to act out his violent fantasies. The film stays close to the killer's point of view, which makes everything feel distorted and unnatural. The victims do not react like movie victims usually do, and the result is claustrophobic, brutal, and deeply uncomfortable.